Every decade had its group of heartthrobs, and the 90s was no different. The boy band genre can be traced back to the 1950s Doo-Wop bands. Through the 60s, the Beatles could be considered the boy band of that decade, and into the 1970s, an era that produced such memorable groups as the Jackson 5 and the Osmonds. Things were quiet in the 1980s, the decade of big hair and synthesizers, but the genre reappeared, and some would say had its peak, in the mid to late 1990s, a time where young girls could swoon over the many boy bands that saturated the music airwaves. Let's see. There was the Backstreet Boys, straight out of Orlando, Florida. They wowed their fans with hits that went to the hearts of teenage girls everywhere, and their hits were simple yet catchy and were heard on the radio stations around the world. There was New Kids on the Block, hailing from Boston, adding swagger to the boy band category with singable songs and cute group members that quickly became heartthrobs to the many tweens and teens who followed their every move. Boys to Men, NSync, and from across the pond, Take That, continued to saturate the airwaves with more catchy songs and good looks. The genre had been made, and it reached its peak in the late 1990s when many of the top songs on the airwaves and the Billboard charts belonged to one of these popular groups. At the height of their popularity, boy bands were seen by those who consider themselves serious musicians and their fans as prefabricated, synthetic, and poor facsimiles of real talent. And some would say these detractors were correct in their estimations. It became widely known in later years that the formation of many of these popular groups began in the minds of astute music producers who realized that wholesome good looks and some catchy hooks was often enough to guarantee musical success. Yes, many of the most popular boy bands were created with the sole purpose of having the group become the object of many a young girl's dreams, which most often translated into record sales. As a result, many of the bands were held to strict contractual obligations, which included control of each member's clothes, appearance, interviews, and much more. It was a business after all. The end of the 1990s saw the decline in the boy band genre, and while there was a brief resurgence of these kinds of groups in the mid-2000s, it never reached the level of saturation that was seen in the late 90s. Will boy bands make a comeback in years to come? Maybe. Let's just hope, though, that if and when it happens, we're not overwhelmed with groups of this kind. After all, there's enough music and fan photos of former boy band groups to last us a lifetime.